having refined sensibilities. So we can distill some of our crude nature programming into something a little more elegant. We can become elegant. We can become graceful. So yeah, I think that's a starting point, is to recognize that that's the human organism. The human organism is not disabled like any other organism, in the sense that it can understand that there is an economy it's part of. That.
Okay, so there's some conversations going on the internet. I thought I would jump in. It's all about logic between Hythloday and Inmendham. So I thought I'd jump in and talk a little bit about my own views of Lakatosian logic. And hopefully I can get it done in 10 minutes, because that's my time constraint. Otherwise it'll be more than one video, maybe 2, maybe 3, but hopefully we get it done in 10, but I'm already wasting time, so here we go. Great, okay, so Lakatosian logic. Lakatos basically said that, science, logic, and math are basically, they constitute a web of beliefs. And these webs, they end up getting broken and then mended and then broken and mended. These breakings and mendings are both inevitable, and it makes ideas indestructible. And to talk about this, we're going to use my version of Inmendham's antinatalist Benatar argument to talk about it. So here we've got the frame of the argument. It's got 3 premises that have a conclusion. So premise 1, humans, they can be classified as extremely destructive, like a virus. For example, this paper and the ink that I used to create this presentation had their part in making the environment. Premise 2, humans can change but won't change. And I put this in there to try and avoid the fallacy of induction, where we're going to assume that things will always be the same as they are now. Premise 3, species destruction rating should be the criteria for whether or not a species should be euthanized. Conclusion, here's Bender saying, destroy all humans. And is this valid? Well, the idea is that, humans are destructive, and destructive should be the criteria, and therefore we're going to see if that's valid. And so we'll look at all the various premises and see if they're valid. Okay, so this one's premise 3, which was a species destruction rating should be the criteria of whether or not a species should be euthanized. I'm going to go ahead and say some destruction is good, and yeah, that's like suffering. And so Venom's always like, well, if you're saying suffering is good, that's just silly. But if there's benefits over the cost of the suffering, then that could imply that the suffering would be okay. And for an example of this, I'm going to talk about foxes eating rabbits. And so the foxes chase down the rabbits and they hunt them, and it's brutal and very scary for the rabbit and very unpleasant for the rabbit. As such, the thing is, it would be worse without the foxes. Without the foxes, the rabbits would face overpopulation and all be on the verge, but not quite starving and disease-ridden. So they'd be suffering for their whole life, as opposed to just a brief moment of suffering at the end that's very intense by getting eaten by a fox. But they're going to go say that premise 2, too much destruction is intolerable. So for instance, if one species like the humans was going to destroy the whole world, then that would be intolerable. So premise 3, the intolerable should be euthanized. So again, here's our conclusion, that the rating system does imply euthanization. If a species is too destructive and is intolerable, then they should be euthanized. And I think that is certainly entailed by those three premises. Okay, premise 2 in our framework was humans can change but won't change. So for that one, I'm going to have premise 1 be humans can change. There's a civil rights movement where things were worse off for black people in the past, and then things changed. And as we saw Inmendham talking about in the beginning of this video, that humans are smart enough to escape from the trap of procreation and become what Inmendham would consider to be enlightened. And then premise 2, humans won't change. And this is justified because humans are self-interest, and it's in the self-interest of the humans to consume the planet to the point of destruction, where we want to have TVs and papers and all this stuff that we consume, and so it's in our interest to destroy. Therefore, our conclusion is that we have can and we have won't, right? So we have can and won't, right? That's just an additive inclusion. And that's semantically equivalent to but. So we can have can but won't. It's the same as can and won't. And so there's validity for premise 2. So premise 1 was humans can be classified as extremely destructive, like a virus, or should be classified as extremely destructive. So should is a normative statement, but it's simple when applied to classification. So if an example meets the criteria, then the example should be classified into that classification because it meets the criteria. That's just a setup. Premise 2, humans do meet the criteria for extremely destructive. And I think that's pretty evident from, if you were going to make any measure of extremely destructive to the environment and whatnot, then humans would certainly fit that criteria. And hence, humans are just a virus and a plague and whatnot. So that's basically the argument. What we had was let me go back to this first page of the frame here. We had these three premises, and we have shown that they are all independently valid. And so now I want to talk about breaking the web. So again, the argument frame is valid and has premises that are all independently valid. But contradiction exists in premise 3-2 and 2-2. Basically, both destruction is both intolerable and in our self-interest. And so that breaks up the web that this argument creates. There's some break to it, but this happens to all web of beliefs. It's Lakatos' point, is that you can't have a web of beliefs that isn't going to suffer from this. That includes science and math and logic and religion. And I understand I'm going from an example to a general case here. But as we go to the second part, the patching of the web, then you can see what I'm saying. So now when there's some refutation like this, a contradiction, not all science needs to be thrown out when we find new data that contradicts a paradigm. Ideas can be saved from refutation by means of a patch. So patches here are one, a time differential where we value the present more, but this leaves the question when. When should we euthanize? Well, not now because we value the present more, and not later because the people in the future will value that present. Another patch that we might put on is, well, we want to value the animal well-being more. And then that answers the question, well, which animals pre-value? Because generalist species like squirrels are better off in the cities than they were in the wild. They can find stuff to eat and are generally happier in the cities, and that's why they live there. So without humans, some animals would be better off, some animals wouldn't, and which ones? And these objections can then also be patched, and that adds more complexity to the argument, and the more complexity makes more breaking points for the web to be broken.